Hi, I'm June, and I'm an instructor here at the Turing School, and I'm going to be teaching a class on lazy loading your components in React and in Webpack. So if you're here, you are at the right place because we are going to be talking about lazy loading in React and how that really affects the bundle size of your code and how that affects performance. And it's something that has just really started to explode and something you will see oftentimes in a lot of code bases. And so before we dive in and jump in, let's give you a little bit of context about like how I thought through this and thought of it. Oftentimes I feel like there's a lot of connections between like real life and code and concepts, and I feel like if we can kind of understand that better, it'll help us with our learning today. That's my wife. And side note, she's way cooler than me. So if you ever meet her, you'll know she's like way cooler than me. And at the start of our relationship, my wife got me into rock climbing. Like sort of, right? Like I wasn't really like into it, but I knew that she was really cute and I really liked her. And so what ended up happening was I spent a ton of money on gear. I was like, I'm gonna go buy a harness, $100. Go buy shoes, $120. I'm gonna go buy a chalk bag. I'm gonna buy some chalk. And what ended up happening was rock climbing was super hard, and I ended up not really using any of the gear for a while. But I married her, so it worked, right? So I spent a bunch of money on gear that I didn't really use. And it's funny like how that works. You like that whole process. And in reality, like we do this in our code all the time, right? Like we are giving the user a bunch of things that they may or may not use, and they're paying for it, right? And they shouldn't be paying for it until they actually have the opportunity to use that code, right? So we run our code currently on like localhost 8080, and it runs super fast, right? But the problem is, like in the real world, oftentimes when it's in production and we've put it up there, our code's going to run a little bit like this. Right, it's going to be a lot slower than we've expected it to run. I love that GIF, it's hilarious. So here's the problem, right? Our build, like we typically will run Webpack to bundle up our code. Our build is loading code or shipping code to the user that like they probably are not going to need or use ever. Like, what does that mean? What do you mean by that, right? Well, more practically, like maybe code they aren't going to use yet, or maybe they're never ever going to use, right? So if I log on to your app and you bundle all your code, you've required all the components you've needed, and I'm not an admin, but I'm still paying for an admin code. Like I haven't logged in, right? And like you're still loading that code for me, right? I may never ever even become an admin, but I'm paying for that, right? Or maybe I'm just a regular user and I'm just paying for a user component, but I'm paying for all of it, right? So ultimately, the user is paying for the price. Now, you might be saying, hey, my computer is pretty fast. Why should I even care? You're loading all this code. Like, doesn't matter. It's kilobytes, right? I shouldn't really care. My computer has like 8 gigabytes of RAM. Like, it should be fine. But as of late, over 50%, over half of web interactions are on mobile now, right? And as of March 2017, there are about 3.74 billion internet users, and over half of them are now on mobile, right? And the thing about mobile is that like a phone is never going to be as fast as a computer, right? Currently. Right? And what's interesting about mobile is we have mobile CSS, we have like HTML to accommodate mobile devices, right? But our JavaScript is not mobile friendly, right? You're shipping out builds that are large builds, and your small phone is not going to be able to run that. Interesting enough, on staff, we have somebody who's still rocking an iPhone 4. I love the iPhone 4, happens to be my favorite iPhone, but like that is an old phone, right? And loading websites is going to load particularly slower on that phone than like on an iPhone 10, right? And so here's the deal with that. Like a single second delay in your website could equal a 7% loss in conversion. And 40% of web users are abandoning websites if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. So if your website is loading less than 3 seconds, then you've lost your user. I also read another statistic that said that the attention span of users have shrunk from 12 seconds to 8 seconds now because things are loading so fast. And so we need to make sure that when we load our website, when it is mobile, right? At some point, we're not even going to talk about mobile first. It's just going to be mobile because everybody's going to just have mobile sites, right? Because that's where the net seems to be moving. So we need to accommodate that. Of all of the sales that occurred through online marketplaces, Amazon had about 80% of them. Okay. In 2012, Amazon reported a $1.6 billion loss if their page loaded a second later, right? So like annually. So like if for a year their page was loading 1 second later, they lost $1.6 billion, right? So now we know like the reason why this matters, right? Like our users care, they want fast websites. Most of the devices that people are using are either like an old device or like sometimes on the bleeding edge, but for the most part, like they need their website to load faster. Therefore, our builds need to be leaner, right? We don't want to be loading all the code at once. We want to load the code when the user actually needs them. So is there anything we can do about it? Yes. That's where we lazy load our components, right? The goal of this is to load minimal code needed to get our application to run, right? So I don't want to be paying for things or like downloading things I don't necessarily need. I want to grab those things or require those files when I need them, right? The problem is we like import all our files at the top and then like our builds get really huge. So when we need that component, we need to grab it. So you might be saying like, well, that sounds all great and stuff, but like how do I do that, right? Can you re-explain that? And that's where we talk about dynamic imports in Webpack, okay? Let's talk about that first part, right? You might have seen this before, right? Require some file. And that came to us like kind of like in the ES5 days when we were requiring files manually. You'd pretty much like var name of the module equals require this, right? And that was all great and stuff. And then we got ES6, right? And then we got the modular import, right? Import tacos from San Diego, right? Like you see this, you're like, okay, cool. Like I'm importing this part. Like this is now the variable name. I'm modular importing pieces, right? You can even use the destructuring thing to import things that you want in like small parts of that module. Now, you might not have seen this before, but this is what's really, really cool. Is this. Does anybody know what this returns? Just take a guess.
Promise.
Yes, it does. This returns a promise, right? Because what that is actually doing is it's asynchronously loading that component for you, right? So when you need to grab some data, you need to grab a file, you can import that data set or that component or whatever you're importing asynchronously, right? So essentially what we've done is we've taken the build data and we've split it, right? Because now we're saying, cool, I don't need you until I actually need you, right? And what's really cool about this is when you actually run your bundle and your like create React app or whatever Webpack config you have, Webpack will split the build load into dynamic files. So you have your initial build and then you'll have a separate file that will load that, which is like pretty awesome because now like it'll just do that for you. You don't have to like really load anything. It actually makes everything pretty easy. So enough talk about that. Let's actually like code, because I think if we actually see this, this will allow us to kind of conceptualize like what's going on and how beneficial this is and like how easy it is to like implement into your projects because it doesn't really take much. So let's end the slides and let's go ahead and switch over to this. Sweet. Cool. So right now, I have a simple CRUD app. This may look like something you've seen before. Idea box. So if we load this, let me actually go here and make this a little bit larger so you can see. It's just an idea box, right? And so I can say like hello world, and I get that, and I can remove it. Sounds great, looks good, right? We've seen this before. Now, if we look at idea box, the things we probably need right off the bat are going to be our controls and just like our bare JSX, right? What is like one thing that we are probably not going to need right off the bat? Card and the card container, right? If I go onto your site and never put on an idea, right? It kind of defeats the purpose of like using my app. But like if you go on there and like never use it, then I should never have to load those files onto my page, right? So what we want to do is we want to like dynamically load that single component, the card container, when we actually need it, right? Now, let's actually take a look at the code. So I'm going to stop this. Let's take a look at the code. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean some stuff up here. I'm going to remove this because we don't want that. We don't want to bind. What we want to do is we just want to give it an arrow function so it auto binds, right? So let's do that. Oops. So now we've auto bound ourselves, right? We need to dynamically load this, right? So we need to start thinking about like probably when do we want to do this? I probably don't want to load my component in when I click a submit button, right? Because every time I click a submit button, what's going to happen? I'm making an asynchronous call, right? That's expensive. We don't want to do that, right? We want to make the call probably once and then keep it there, right? So like what can we do? I initially thought, well, life cycles, right? That makes sense. Like what life cycles should we like load these functions in? And you're like, well, let's do component did mount. That seems great, right? But the problem is when it mounts, then I'm loading in a component that I'm probably still never going to use, right? And that only fires once. Okay, so I can set state there, probably not going to use that one. Component will receive props. That makes sense. I can set state and component will receive props. But does this app component receive props? It does not. So that's never going to run, right? What else do we have? We have component did update, right? Right? So when the component does update, we can say, hey, is there a lazy loaded component in your state? It's not there? Cool. Let's run this function to create your lazy loaded component, right? And then we'll just display that on the DOM. So at that point now you've loaded your file and it's always going to be there. Okay? So, first of all, what I'm thinking about doing is I'm going to say LL container, LL being lazy loaded container, and I'm going to say your value is null, right? You don't have a value. The next thing I probably want to do is to run here component did update, right? That takes previous props, previous state. We're not really using that, but I'll just throw that in there anyways, just so you know, right? Right. And I'm thinking, cool, we'll say, hey, if there is no container, right? Then call this function lazy load container, right? Hey, if you're not in state, there's nothing there, then let's actually like add you, right? So every time this updates, this function is just going to run regardless, right? It's part of the life cycle. We'll just check if it's not there, and if it's not there, we'll load it once, and then we're done. So let's go ahead and add our function. Let's make that. So I'm going to say lazy load container, right? Equals an arrow function, and all we really have to do, and first of all, let's just take care of this. I'm not going to use this anymore, right? I don't want to import this here. I want to get rid of that because I'm not using that. I'm using it when I want it. So let's just say like here const lazy load, right? Let's call it lazy load for now. And then let's just import our /card container, right? And let's just throw a debugger in here, and let's actually see what we get, okay? In the meantime, this is going to break on me, so let's remove this. Okay, so remove the card container. Ooh. Now I'm in. So look what it says. It returns a promise, right? Do you see that? So I can either like .then here and I can do all that nice stuff, but I think I'd rather use async await, right? Because I feel like that reads a lot better, right? It reads more synchronously than asynchronously. So I'm gonna say async here, and I'm gonna wait this. Okay, I'm gonna wait the promise and its return. So now when I do this again, here we are. I have my lazy load. I get this like weird ES module thing, but then I also get default. So I'm gonna go lazy load.default. And there's my card container. There's the actual code for it, right? And so I can be like lazy load.default.card container. So I can do, sometimes debugger doesn't let you do that, but yeah, that's essentially what we're gonna do. And what I'd rather do is I'd rather like destructure that. So what I'm gonna say here is instead of this, I'm gonna say default, and I'm gonna say card container, okay? So now, what I can do is I can then set my state, right? This is gonna give me card container, the actual like component that we're trying to grab, and I'm gonna say this dot set state, right? And here, I'm going to say, I think we call it LL container, and I'm gonna say card container, okay? Cool. So now, maybe what we can do is we know that our state is set there. We want to render this, right? And so we can do some like conditional rendering here. I'm gonna say const LL container, right? And then I'm gonna say here, I need ideas as well, right? And I'm gonna say this is equal to this dot state, okay? And now I'm gonna say const lazy load container, right? And this is gonna be like, hey, is there a container here? Right? Is there something here? If there is something here, then let's make a component, right? Let's give you ideas, right? And what else are we gonna give this? Remove idea, right? Or delete idea. So delete idea equals this dot delete idea, right? And if you're not there, return null, right? Seems legit. All right, cool. So we'll say lazy load container, right? Compiling. Refresh. Please work. Work, please? Yes. So we've loaded that, right? So like that's cool and all, but like we don't really know if that's working until we actually run our build, right? Because when we run our build, then we can actually see our code split, right? Initially, if we had ran our build, we would have just seen one file, but now like we can actually run our build and actually see that the code has been split. So I'm gonna run npm run build. And so it's gonna optimize our build for us. And what you're gonna see now is you're gonna see two builds, right? you're going to see like the static build, like this first main build is like the main Webpack.js. And then you're going to see this where it says, cool, this is your chunk, right? This is the chunk of code you're going to run when you need it, right? So I want to show you what this would look like in action in like an actual like running server. And so what Create React app gives you is this thing called serve that you can install globally. And you can say run server build. What this is going to do is it's going to run this server like it were on production on localhost 5000. And what I want you to pay attention to is when we do this, bless you, yeah, go to 5000, that you will see, let's actually go to our network tabs, right? So if we go to our network tab right now, and we just see JS, when I refresh this, you should only see one thing load, right? Do you see this? This is our like main static build. You can actually go into the sources or the elements tab and see that here. This is like your main build, right? You see like this hash here. Like if you go to the network, like you will see the same hash for that code that you're loading. Now the difference being now, if I make this smaller and move this over, that's not working like how I'd like it to work. Oh well. So dude, that now, do you see this extra call? Well, that extra call is that chunk of code that we had loaded. Because now it's only loading in that component when we actually need it. So essentially what we've done is we've split our build, we've split our code, right? And there it actually is, there's our chunk 09C. There it is. And so what we've done is we've said, hey, I only want this code when I need it. And that has now like allowed us to split our build and theoretically make that build a lot leaner and smaller, right? And so for you, obviously in this small application, it's not really going to do anything, right? You're actually probably overloading this because it's so small. But if you had a large application and you needed to split your code so that your build size would be a lot smaller, this is the way to do that. And the best part about this is you don't really need any external libraries. All you're using is like regular JavaScript, something that's already built into the language that you get for free, right? And it's so easy to do. You're literally just, hey, I need this now, let me grab it. And so I really think that like if you are planning to use this, you should, because it's super simple to implement, and it allows you to have your build size radically reduced. Any questions that I can answer for you, or anything you'd like to go over? Anything that looks questionable that you'd like to talk about?
Is it relying on Webpack?
Yes and no right now, right? So like this syntax is totally fine, but it's an ES7 thing, right? And so right now not all the browsers are supporting that. And so from my understanding, what Webpack is actually doing is it creates like another, or I don't know if it's still doing this now, but in prior versions it was actually like creating a script tag for you and like wrapping your component in that like another like build script tag so that when you did call it, it would grab that for you. It's not showing that in our elements tab, right? But like it definitely like theoretically that's what it's doing. As we begin to move out, I think the hope is that like, you know, just like in JavaScript, first class citizens are functions and stuff like that, that like we could make components that are just asynchronous in nature, right? Because instead of like having to like kind of like bootstrap it to be like this asynchronous thing, it'd be really cool if React could do that for you, where you're like, hey, like you just load when I need you to load, right? And I think that'd be like a really cool push to see that happen in like React Fiber, where we don't have to like do this anymore, because there are some things that aren't great about this, obviously, right? That you're getting a promise and that you still have to wait, like that takes a little bit longer. But if we can like streamline that process, that'd be super dope. Any other questions? No questions. Cool. Well, thanks for sitting in and listening to me talk. Cool. Thanks.